Hello, and welcome to Lotus Light Teachings. Today, we're exploring a topic that resonates deeply with many of us: the art of letting go. Have you ever felt weighed down by certain people or situations, unsure if walking away is the right choice? Together, we'll uncover the silent wisdom of releasing what no longer serves you and how this act can lead to profound inner peace. Let's begin this journey of discovery and growth. Have you ever noticed the stillness of early morning, when the world feels quiet and everything seems clear? It's in those moments of silence that our truest insights often emerge. But what happens when the noise isn't external? It's within us, stirred by the relationships and dynamics that disrupt our peace. Imagine this: you're carrying a heavy backpack on a long hike. As the journey stretches on, each step becomes harder, and you wonder why you're struggling. Then, you stop to check the bag and realize it's full of things you no longer need, things you've been holding onto out of habit. What would you do? Would you keep carrying the weight, or would you let it go? Life, too, is like this hike. Sometimes we unknowingly carry people or patterns that drain our energy and cloud our clarity. Zen and Buddhist teachings remind us that peace doesn't come from enduring every burden. It comes from knowing which to release. Letting go isn't easy, but it's a profound act of self-love and discernment. In today's conversation, we'll journey through stories, lessons, and practical steps to help you identify and release two types of people who may be holding you back: the Manipulative Controller and the Relentlessly Negative Soul. Together, we'll uncover how silence, boundaries, and wisdom can guide you toward a life of greater freedom and harmony. 1. Finding serenity: why silence holds the key to inner peace. Have you ever found yourself in the middle of chaos, yearning for a moment of quiet, not just around you but within you? Silence, in its purest form, is not merely the absence of sound. It is the presence of clarity. In the teachings of the Buddha, silence is often described as the fertile ground where wisdom can take root, like a lotus that rises untouched from the mud. But what is it about silence that allows us to find serenity, especially in a world filled with noise? To begin understanding, let us reflect on the Buddhist teaching of anicca, or impermanence. Everything in life is transient. Emotions, relationships, possessions, even our thoughts. Clinging to what is fleeting only leads to suffering, as outlined in the first noble truth of dukkha. In silence, we can observe the impermanence of our inner world without judgment. It is a space where we see our thoughts come and go, like clouds drifting across the sky. Through this observation, we begin to realize that nothing we experience is permanent, and this realization is the first step toward letting go of what disrupts our harmony. There is a story from the Buddha's time that beautifully illustrates this. One day, a disciple approached the Buddha with a troubled heart. "Master," he said, "I am consumed by anger and frustration because of another's words. How do I free myself from this torment?" The Buddha, in his serene manner, asked the disciple, "If someone offers you a gift, but you refuse to accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The disciple replied, "To the one who offered it." The Buddha smiled. "Then why do you accept the anger they offer? Let it go, and it will remain with them." This teaching reveals the essence of silence, not only as a practice of speechlessness but as an inner posture of non-reactivity. When we choose not to engage with the chaos around us, we reclaim our peace. Silence becomes the canvas upon which our wisdom paints clarity. Modern life often compels us to react instantly, be it to an email, a comment, or a criticism. But the teachings of the Eightfold Path, particularly right mindfulness, samasati, remind us to pause and observe. Mindfulness allows us to see that not every reaction is necessary, and not every situation demands our involvement. In silence, we discern what truly requires our energy and attention. Consider the metaphor of a still pond. When the surface is calm, it reflects everything around it clearly: the trees, the sky, even the stars at night. But when disturbed, the water becomes murky, and nothing can be seen. Our mind works in the same way. When we are constantly reacting, our thoughts become jumbled, and our decisions are clouded. Silence, like the still pond, restores clarity. But silence is not always easy to cultivate. It requires us to confront what we often avoid ourselves. Many people fear silence because it brings them face to face with their anxieties, regrets, and unhealed wounds. Yet, it is in this confrontation that healing begins. The Buddha taught that suffering is not to be feared but understood, as described in the second noble truth. Suffering arises from attachment. Silence gives us the space to investigate these attachments and to gently release them. Let's bring this into a modern context. Imagine a busy professional who feels constantly overwhelmed by deadlines, office politics, and the expectations of others. Each day feels like a battle, leaving them exhausted and disconnected from their own needs. If this person could dedicate just a few minutes a day to sitting in silence, away from phones, notifications, and conversations, they might begin to notice something profound. They would see the patterns of their stress and realize that much of it stems from trying to control what is uncontrollable. In that silence, they might find the courage to let go of perfectionism, delegate tasks, or simply say no when necessary. Silence also teaches compassion, not only toward others but toward ourselves. In a world that glorifies productivity, many of us feel guilty for taking time to be still. But the Buddha's teaching of metta, loving kindness, starts with self-compassion. To sit in silence is to honor your need for rest, reflection, and renewal. It is an act of self-love that strengthens your ability to love others. There's another layer to this wisdom: silence as an act of connection. Paradoxical as it may seem, silence deepens our relationships. When we refrain from interrupting, judging, or trying to fix someone else's experience, we create space for genuine understanding. The next time you are with a loved one, try listening with your whole presence, without the need to fill the gaps with words. You may find that silence speaks louder than advice ever could. Returning to Buddhist philosophy, silence aligns with the law of karma. Every word we speak carries energy that ripples outward. When we speak with anger or haste, we contribute to discord. When we choose silence over unnecessary speech, we plant seeds of peace. This is why the Buddha included right speech, samavaka, in the Eightfold Path. Silence is not the absence of speech, but the mindful use of it. In personal reflection, I have found silence to be a sanctuary. There were times in my life when I faced overwhelming grief, the loss of loved ones, the shattering of dreams. In those moments, no words could comfort me, but sitting quietly, observing my breath, and letting my emotions flow without resistance brought solace. It was in silence that I realized pain is a teacher, not an enemy, and that even the deepest sorrow will eventually pass. For those of you navigating loss, change, or uncertainty, I invite you to embrace silence as a companion. Sit with your feelings no matter how uncomfortable. Trust that within the stillness lies the wisdom to move forward. As the Buddha said, you yourself, as much as anybody in the entire universe, deserve your love and affection. Silence allows us to hear this truth. In closing, remember that silence is not emptiness. It is fullness. It is the space where wisdom resides, where clarity emerges, and where peace takes root. It is the key that unlocks the door to serenity, not because it changes the world around us, but because it transforms how we relate to it. As you move forward, I encourage you to ask yourself, what noise, internal or external, can I let go of to find my stillness? And when you find that quiet space, cherish it. For in that silence, you will discover the voice of your own wisdom. 2. The wise teacher's lesson: endurance versus discernment. Imagine sitting under the shade of an ancient tree, the air heavy with the scent of earth and leaves. A wise teacher speaks softly, his words rippling like water in a still pond. A student, burdened by life's complexities, sits before him, seeking guidance. Master, the student begins, should I endure the pain caused by others to prove my patience, or should I let go and risk being judged as selfish or unkind? The teacher smiles, his gaze steady and kind. Endurance and discernment are like two sides of the same coin, he replies. The world often praises endurance as a virtue, but true wisdom lies in knowing what to endure and what to release. This question, when to endure and when to let go, is one we all grapple with. In relationships, workplaces, And even within ourselves, the line between patience and unnecessary suffering can become blurred. Yet, the teachings of the Buddha provide a lens through which we can understand this delicate balance. The Buddha's teachings on dukkha, or suffering, remind us that pain is an inevitable part of existence. Relationships will challenge us, circumstances will test us, and life will bring moments of discomfort. However, the second noble truth reveals that much of our suffering arises not from these events themselves, but from our attachment to them, our inability to discern when to release what no longer serves us. The wise teacher illustrates this with a story. Once, there was a farmer who carried a heavy sack of grain to market every day. The journey was long and arduous, but he endured it, believing that the grain was essential for his livelihood. One day, halfway to market, the sack tore open, and grain spilled onto the road. The farmer froze, unsure of what to do. Should he gather the grain, losing time and energy, or let it go and focus on reaching the market with what remained? The farmer's predicament mirrors our own lives. How often do we hold on to things, people, or situations that no longer benefit us, simply because we have invested so much in them? The Buddha's teachings on anicca, impermanence, remind us that clinging to what is inevitably transient only deepens our suffering. Like the farmer, we must sometimes let go of what we cannot save to preserve what we can. Endurance has its place in spiritual practice. It teaches us resilience, compassion, and the ability to face life's challenges with grace. The Buddha himself exemplified this when he meditated under the Bodhi tree, enduring physical discomfort and mental temptations until he attained enlightenment. However, endurance without discernment can become self-destructive. The third noble truth, the cessation of suffering, shows us that liberation comes not from enduring endlessly, but from understanding when to release our attachments. In the modern world, this wisdom applies profoundly. Consider a person who remains in a toxic relationship, believing that enduring mistreatment is a testament to their loyalty or love. They may tell themselves that patience will transform the situation, but in truth, they are slowly eroding their self-worth. Buddhism teaches that compassion must begin with ourselves. Metta, loving kindness, calls us to protect our own well-being as much as that of others. Walking away from harm is not an act of selfishness. It is an act of self-respect. Another example can be found in the workplace. Imagine an employee who stays in a job that drains their energy and passion, fearing that leaving would mean failure. They endure the stress, telling themselves that perseverance is noble. Yet, without discernment, endurance can trap them in a cycle of unhappiness. The Eightfold Path, particularly right effort, samavayama, teaches us to direct our energy toward what uplifts and supports us, rather than what depletes us. The wise teacher explains further. Discernment is the ability to see clearly, to recognize what is worth your energy and what is not. It is the wisdom to know that letting go is not an act of defeat, but a step toward freedom. He shares another story, a young monk who was often criticized by an elder in their monastery. The monk endured the criticism, believing it was a test of his patience. But over time, he noticed that the elder's words sowed doubt in his mind, draining his focus and peace. One day, the young monk sought guidance from his teacher. "Master," he said, "should I continue to endure the elder's harsh words, or should I leave?" The teacher replied, "Endure only that which strengthens your spirit. If their words do not guide you to wisdom but instead cloud your clarity, it is wise to step away." Remember, the Buddha taught us to abandon what leads to suffering. This lesson resonates deeply. Endurance without purpose is like carrying a stone uphill, knowing it will only roll back down. Discernment, however, allows us to distinguish between the necessary trials that lead to growth and the unnecessary burdens that keep us stagnant. When we apply this principle to our own lives, we begin to see the patterns that hold us back. Are there relationships that drain us without nurturing us? Are there beliefs we hold onto out of fear or pride, rather than truth? Are there paths we continue to walk, not because they bring us joy, but because we fear starting anew? These questions require courage to answer, but they also lead to liberation. The Buddha's teachings on karma remind us that every choice we make carries consequences. To endure something toxic or harmful is to perpetuate suffering, not only for ourselves but for others as well. Conversely, to let go of what no longer aligns with our well-being is to create the conditions for peace and happiness. The wise teacher concludes his lesson with a simple yet profound insight. Letting go is not abandonment. It is a return to yourself. To endure what strengthens you is noble, but to release what weakens you is wisdom. As we reflect on this teaching, we realize that discernment is not a one-time decision. It is a lifelong practice. It requires mindfulness, self-awareness, and the courage to face change. It is the ability to sit with discomfort, observe its impermanence, and trust that releasing it will open the door to something greater. For those of us facing loss or change, this wisdom can feel daunting. Letting go may mean stepping into the unknown, risking judgment, or grieving what once was. Yet, the Buddha reminds us that suffering is not the end of the story. The fourth noble truth, the path to liberation, shows us that by following the eightfold path, we can transform suffering into growth, loss into freedom, and change into wisdom. So, as you sit with the challenges in your life, ask yourself, am I enduring because it serves my growth, or because I fear letting go? And if the answer is the latter, know that the act of release is not a failure. It is a profound act of self-respect and courage. In letting go, you make space for something beautiful to take root, like the lotus rising above the mud. 3. The manipulative controller, recognizing and releasing subtle power games. Have you ever felt an inexplicable unease after interacting with someone? Like a heaviness that lingers long after they've left? Sometimes, it isn't the loud conflicts or overt mistreatment that disrupt our peace, but the quiet, subtle manipulation that slowly erodes our sense of self. Manipulation often wears the mask of charm or concern, making it difficult to detect until its impact is deeply felt. This hidden dynamic is what makes it so draining, so insidious. Let us begin with a story. In a small monastery nestled in the hills, there was a young monk who was earnest in his pursuit of enlightenment. He was kind, humble, and eager to learn. Among the elders in the monastery was one who possessed great charisma. This elder was respected by many for his eloquence and wit, but his influence over the younger monks was not entirely wholesome. He often gave advice that seemed wise but left the young monk doubting his own judgment. Over time, the young monk noticed a pattern. Every interaction with the elder left him feeling smaller, uncertain, and overly reliant on the elder's approval. One evening, burdened by confusion, the young monk sat by a stream. The gentle flow of water seemed to mirror his restless thoughts. His teacher approached and asked, "What troubles you, my child?" The monk shared his dilemma, explaining how the elder's words, though polished and well-meaning, often left him feeling trapped. "Should I endure this as a test of my patience, master?" he asked. The teacher smiled, pointing to the stream. "Do you see how the water flows around the rocks? It does not argue with them or try to push them away. It simply adjusts its course and continues onward. A manipulative controller in your life is like these rocks. To remain in their presence is to lose your flow. To walk away is not an act of anger, but of wisdom." This parable captures a profound truth. Manipulative individuals thrive on control, often achieved not through overt aggression but through subtle, calculated interactions. Their charm and persuasiveness can mask their true intent, making it difficult to recognize their influence until the damage is done. They may twist your words, use guilt as a weapon, or present themselves as indispensable to your well-being, all while draining your energy and self-confidence. From a Buddhist perspective, such dynamics disrupt the natural harmony of our lives. The Buddha's teachings on right association emphasize the importance of surrounding ourselves with individuals who uplift and inspire us. Manipulative controllers, on the other hand, sow doubt, confusion, and a dependence that pulls us away from our path. Recognizing and releasing their influence is not an act of rejection but a step toward restoring our balance. The teachings of anicca, or impermanence, remind us that nothing in life is fixed. Relationships, like all things, are subject to change. Holding on to a manipulative dynamic out of fear or obligation only deepens our suffering, as outlined in the second noble truth. True wisdom lies in discerning when to let go, allowing space for healthier connections to flourish. In modern life, manipulation often manifests in subtle ways. Imagine a friend who always seems to have your best interests at heart, but consistently undermines your decisions with phrases like, "Are you sure you want to do that?" Or, "I'm only saying this because I care." Over time, their words create a fog of self-doubt, leaving you second-guessing your choices. Or consider a colleague who takes credit for your ideas while framing it as teamwork. These dynamics may not feel overtly harmful, but their cumulative effect is profoundly disempowering. The Buddha's teachings on karma provide a framework for understanding these interactions. Every thought, word, and action we allow into our lives creates ripples that shape our reality. Allowing manipulative behavior to persist not only affects our mental and emotional well-being, but also reinforces patterns of control in the other person. By stepping away, we break the cycle, creating conditions for both parties to grow. Walking away from a manipulative controller is not without its challenges. Guilt, fear of judgment, or the hope that they might change can hold us back. However, the Eightfold Path offers guidance, particularly through right effort and right mindfulness. Right effort teaches us to cultivate actions that lead to peace and wisdom, while right mindfulness helps us observe our experiences without attachment. Together, they empower us to recognize manipulation for what it is and take steps to protect our peace. A personal reflection comes to mind. There was a time in my life when I found myself entangled with someone who seemed supportive, but whose actions often left me feeling inadequate. They offered advice laced with subtle criticism, disguised as concern. It took years to realize that their influence was not helping me grow but keeping me small. When I finally chose to distance myself, it felt like stepping into sunlight after years in the shadow. The clarity and freedom that followed were profound. Releasing a manipulative controller does not mean harboring resentment. The Buddha's teachings on metta, or loving kindness, remind us to let go with compassion. Recognize that their behavior stems from their own pain or insecurities, but also understand that their healing is not your responsibility. By walking away, you create the space for both yourself and them to confront your respective truths. There is a Zen saying that goes, "A person who cannot control their own mind will try to control others." This insight reminds us that manipulation often reflects an inner turmoil in the manipulator, a need to assert control externally because they lack it internally. By refusing to engage, we not only protect our peace but also mirror the possibility of inner freedom. Let us return to the image of the stream flowing around the rocks. Like the water, we must learn to navigate around obstacles without losing our essence. This requires self-awareness, courage, and the willingness to prioritize our well-being over the comfort of familiarity. It is a practice, one that deepens with time and mindfulness. As you reflect on your own life, consider, are there individuals who consistently leave you feeling drained, uncertain, or diminished? What would it mean to flow around those rocks, to preserve your energy for what truly matters? The act of letting go is not easy, but it is a profound declaration of self-respect and alignment with your highest path. The wisdom of the teacher's words lingers. To walk away is not an act of anger, but of wisdom. Carry this insight with you, and trust that by releasing what no longer serves you, you make room for clarity, strength, and peace to flow into your life. For the relentlessly negative soul, when optimism cannot heal pessimism. There's a quiet kind of heartbreak that comes from giving your best to someone who refuses to see it. It's like pouring water into a cup that refuses to stand upright. No matter how much you give, it spills wasted, leaving both of you drained. Have you ever tried to uplift someone, only to find that their negativity feels like an anchor, pulling you deeper into despair? This is the essence of dealing with a relentlessly negative soul, an individual who clings to pessimism, not as a passing phase, but as a way of being. In a small village long ago, there lived a traveler known for their radiant kindness. This traveler believed deeply in the goodness of people and the power of compassion. One day, they encountered a villager infamous for their negativity. The villager complained about the weather when it was sunny and found fault in the rain when it fell gently. If kindness was offered, they dismissed it as insincere. If left alone, they lamented their isolation. The traveler, moved by compassion, decided to help the villager. They shared stories of hope, offered acts of kindness, and spent countless hours listening to the villager's grievances. But no matter what the traveler did, the villager remained steeped in despair, their negativity untouched. Over time, the traveler began to feel the weight of the villager's darkness, noticing their own light dimming. Finally, weary and disheartened, the traveler sought the guidance of a wise elder in the village. "Why does my light not brighten their darkness?" the traveler asked, their voice tinged with sorrow. The elder smiled gently and said, "It is not the fault of your light, my child. Some people are like bottomless vessels. No matter how much you pour into them, they cannot be filled. Their negativity is a choice, not a condition. To continue pouring is to lose your own vitality." This story speaks to a profound truth. The Buddha taught that compassion is essential, but so is wisdom. In the Dhammapada, it is written, "If anything is worth doing, do it with all your heart. But the heart must also discern where its efforts bear fruit." Helping someone who refuses help is not an act of kindness. It is an act of self-sacrifice that serves no purpose. True compassion requires us to recognize when our efforts are neither welcomed nor effective. The concept of dukkha, suffering, is central to understanding this dynamic. The Buddha's first noble truth tells us that suffering is inherent in life. But the second noble truth reveals that much of this suffering arises from our attachments, including our attachment to the idea that we can save others. We cling to the hope that our light will pierce through their darkness, that our optimism will transform their pessimism. But when we encounter someone who is unwilling to change, this attachment only deepens our suffering. Modern life offers countless examples of this dynamic. Perhaps you have a friend who always finds fault in everything, no matter how good their circumstances. You try to cheer them up with encouraging words or gestures, but they dismiss your efforts with cynicism. Or perhaps it's a family member who resists every opportunity for joy, finding reasons to remain in a state of discontent. Over time, you notice their negativity seeping into your own thoughts, clouding your outlook on life. In these moments, the Buddha's teachings on anicca, impermanence, offer clarity. All things, including our relationships, are subject to change. While it is noble to try to help others, clinging to the idea that we must do so at any cost binds us to unnecessary suffering. The Eightfold Path, particularly right effort, samavayama, reminds us to focus our energy on what supports growth and harmony, rather than what drains us. Walking away from a relentlessly negative soul can feel like a betrayal of compassion, but it is, in fact, an act of kindness for both yourself and them. When you continue to pour into someone who refuses to hold what you offer, you not only exhaust yourself but enable their negativity. By stepping back, you allow them to confront their own patterns, creating space for self-reflection and potential growth. It's important to distinguish between temporary negativity and a deeply ingrained pattern of pessimism. We all go through periods of hardship and despair, during which a kind word or gesture can make a world of difference. But the relentlessly negative soul is different. They cling to their misery, rejecting solutions, and often drawing others into their cycle of despair. As the elder in the story said, their negativity is a choice, not a condition. To pour endlessly into such a soul is to lose yourself in their emptiness. One of the most compassionate acts we can offer is to protect our own peace. The Buddha's teachings on metta, loving kindness, begin with self-compassion. We cannot pour from an empty cup, nor can we uplift others if we ourselves are weighed down. By stepping away from relentless negativity, we preserve our energy for those who are open to receiving it, and for the pursuits that align with our values. A personal reflection comes to mind. There was a time when I invested deeply in a relationship with someone who seemed perpetually dissatisfied. No matter what I offered, support, advice, or simple presence, it was never enough. Their negativity began to affect my own mental and emotional health, leaving me drained and disheartened. It was only when I stepped back with a heavy heart that I realized the importance of boundaries. The distance allowed me to regain my clarity and peace, and it gave them the opportunity to face their own struggles without leaning on me as a crutch. This experience taught me that letting go is not an act of rejection but a gesture of trust. Trust that the other person has the capacity to find their own light, and trust in yourself to honor your own needs. The Buddha's teachings on karma remind us that every choice we make sets a ripple in motion. By choosing to protect our peace, we set the conditions for harmony, not only in our own lives but in the lives of those around us. In moments of doubt, it can be helpful to remember the metaphor of the lotus. The lotus grows in muddy water but does not cling to the mud. It rises above, untouched and pure, reaching toward the light. Similarly, we can encounter negativity without becoming entangled in it. We can offer kindness without sacrificing ourselves, and we can release what no longer serves us with compassion and grace. For those of you who find yourselves pouring into someone who refuses to hold your light, I invite you to reflect. What would it mean to step back? What might you discover if you redirected your energy toward what uplifts you? The act of stepping away is not easy, but it is a profound affirmation of your own worth and an invitation for the other person to take responsibility for their own growth. As the elder said to the traveler, "It is not the fault of your light. Your light is not diminished by their darkness. By choosing to protect it, you ensure that it continues to shine, not only for yourself but for those who are ready to embrace it." 5. Rebuilding from within, practical lessons for growth and boundaries. When we let go of what no longer serves us, we often experience a strange mix of emotions: relief, freedom, and perhaps an unsettling emptiness. What do we do with the space that letting go creates? How do we rebuild ourselves after releasing relationships, habits, or beliefs that once felt essential? The journey of moving forward is not just about leaving the past behind. It's about creating something new and meaningful in its place. The Buddha's teachings offer a roadmap for this process. By engaging in self-reflection, setting healthy boundaries, and reconnecting with our values, we lay the foundation for a life rooted in peace and authenticity. Each of these steps is a practice, a way to honor the space we've created by letting go. In the quiet moments that follow significant change, we might find ourselves asking, "Why did I hold on for so long?" This question is not born of regret but of curiosity. Self-reflection is the first and most important step in rebuilding. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from ignorance, our inability to see things as they truly are. When we reflect on our experiences with honesty and compassion, we begin to uncover the patterns that led us to endure what was harmful or unfulfilling. There is a story from the Buddha's life that illustrates this wisdom. After achieving enlightenment, the Buddha encountered a man who was deeply angry with him. The man hurled insults, trying to provoke a reaction. But the Buddha remained calm, responding only with a question. "If someone offers you a gift and you do not accept it, to whom does the gift belong?" The man replied, "It remains with the giver." The Buddha then said, "So too, I do not accept your anger. It remains with you." This story is a reminder of the power of self-awareness. By examining why we once accepted the gifts of negativity, manipulation, or judgment from others, we can begin to free ourselves from these patterns. Self-reflection is not about blame. It's about understanding. What drew us to these dynamics? What beliefs kept us there? These questions, though difficult, are the seeds of transformation. Setting boundaries is the next step in this journey. When we release toxic ties, we often realize the importance of protecting our peace. Boundaries are not walls. They are guidelines that define what we will and will not accept in our relationships and interactions. The Buddha emphasized the importance of right effort, directing our energy toward what supports our growth and well-being. Boundaries are an expression of this principle. They allow us to preserve our energy for what truly matters. Imagine a garden. Without a fence, it might be trampled by wandering animals or overrun by weeds. But with care and protection, it can flourish. Our lives are much the same. Boundaries create the conditions for growth, ensuring that we are not overwhelmed by the demands or negativity of others. They also teach us to value ourselves. When we say no to what harms us, we are saying yes to what nurtures us. Boundary setting can be challenging, especially if we are used to prioritizing others' needs over our own. But it is an act of kindness, not only toward ourselves but also toward those around us. Clear boundaries prevent misunderstandings and resentment, creating healthier and more balanced relationships. They are a way of saying, I respect myself, and I respect you enough to be honest about my limits. Reconnecting with our values is the final step in rebuilding from within. When we release what no longer serves us, we often discover that we've lost touch with the principles that guide us. What do we stand for? What brings us joy? What gives our lives meaning? These are the questions that help us align our actions with our true selves. The Eightfold Path offers a framework for this alignment. Right speech, right action, and right livelihood encourage us to live in a way that reflects our values. For example, if we value kindness, we might choose to volunteer or support causes that uplift others. If we value creativity, we might dedicate time to pursuing a passion or honing a skill. Living in accordance with our values brings a sense of purpose and fulfillment that no external validation can provide. In my own life, I've found that reconnecting with values often happens in small, quiet moments. It's the decision to spend a morning journaling instead of scrolling through social media. It's the choice to call a friend and offer support rather than dwelling on past grievances. These small acts of alignment remind us of who we are and what we stand for. Rebuilding from within also requires patience. Just as a tree does not bear fruit overnight, personal growth takes time. There will be moments of doubt, times when we feel the pull of old patterns or question whether we made the right choice in letting go. But the Buddha's teaching on impermanence reminds us that these feelings, like all things, will pass. Each step we take, no matter how small, is part of a greater journey toward peace and clarity. For those navigating this path, I offer this reflection. What do you want to grow in the space that letting go has created? Is it peace, creativity, deeper connections? By naming these intentions, you begin to shape the life you want to live. And by practicing self-reflection, setting boundaries, and living in alignment with your values, you take meaningful steps toward that vision. This process is not about becoming someone new. It's about returning to who you've always been beneath the layers of doubt, fear, and obligation. It's about rediscovering your light and allowing it to shine without hesitation. The Buddhist teachings remind us that we all have the capacity for wisdom, compassion, and joy. By rebuilding from within, we honor that truth. As you move forward, remember this: letting go is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a new chapter, one written with intention, clarity, and love. The space you've created is a gift. Fill it with what nourishes your soul, and trust that you are exactly where you need to be. 6. The power of silence, a tool for strength, clarity, and compassion. There's a profound stillness that comes with silence, a kind of quiet that resonates deeper than any spoken word. Have you ever sat alone in the early hours of the morning, when the world seems to hold its breath? In those moments, silence is not just the absence of noise. It's the presence of clarity, strength, and a profound connection to something greater. The Buddha often taught that silence, when embraced with mindfulness, can become one of the most transformative tools in our lives. In the chaotic rhythm of modern life, silence often feels like a luxury. We are bombarded by endless streams of information, conversations, and distractions. Yet, within the teachings of the Eightfold Path, particularly right mindfulness, Samasati, silence is seen as a necessary refuge, a space to observe, reflect, and align ourselves with what truly matters. The story of the Buddha's own enlightenment begins and ends with silence. Sitting beneath the Bodhi tree, the Buddha faced every distraction and temptation the mind could conjure. Yet, instead of engaging with these mental intrusions, he remained still, rooted in silence. This act of non-reaction was not an escape but a profound statement of strength. By not engaging, the Buddha transcended the turmoil of his mind, reaching a place of clarity and peace. Silence has a similar role in our own lives. When faced with negativity, whether it's criticism, anger, or the relentless noise of our inner doubts, our instinct is often to react. We want to defend, explain, or fight back. But what if we chose silence instead? Not the kind of silence that avoids or suppresses, but the kind that observes and releases. In choosing silence, we reclaim our power. We recognize that not every battle is ours to fight, and not every word requires a response. There's a Zen saying, "Silence is not the absence of sound, but the presence of awareness." This distinction is crucial. Silence doesn't mean ignoring or retreating. It means being fully present without the need to control or manipulate what arises. It's an act of courage to sit with discomfort, to watch our thoughts and emotions without judgment, and to allow them to pass like clouds across the sky. This practice, rooted in the Buddhist principle of impermanence, anicca, reminds us that all things, even our struggles, are temporary. In relationships, silence can be a powerful bridge. Imagine a heated argument where both sides are caught in a cycle of blame and defense. Words escalate the tension, widening the gap between understanding and connection. Now, picture one person choosing silence, not out of resignation but out of compassion. This silence creates space, allowing emotions to settle and making room for empathy. As the Buddha taught, right speech, samavaka, is not just about the words we say but also the words we choose not to say. Silence, in this sense, becomes an act of love. In my own life, I found that silence often carries wisdom that words cannot. There was a time when I faced deep grief, the loss of someone I loved dearly. Friends and family, though well-meaning, often filled the space with advice or platitudes, trying to fix what couldn't be fixed. But the moments that brought the most comfort were those spent in quiet companionship, sitting with someone who offered nothing but their presence. In their silence, I found the space to grieve, to feel, and eventually to heal. This is the compassionate aspect of silence. It's not about withholding or distancing. It's about offering the gift of space. Space for others to process their emotions and for ourselves to reflect on our intentions. The Buddha's teachings on metta, loving kindness, begin with self-compassion. Silence allows us to listen to our own needs, to honor our boundaries, and to approach others with greater understanding. But silence is not always easy. It requires us to confront what we often avoid: our fears, our insecurities, and the noise of our own minds. The Buddha referred to this as turning the mind inward, a practice that reveals both the chaos and the calm within us. Through mindfulness meditation, we learn to sit with this inner noise, observing it without attachment. Over time, this practice transforms silence from something intimidating into something liberating. In the context of the modern world, silence can also be a form of resistance. When faced with injustice or manipulation, silence can signal a refusal to engage in systems or dynamics that perpetuate harm. The Buddha's response to Mara, the personification of doubt and temptation, was not to argue or fight, but to touch the earth in silent acknowledgement of his truth. This gesture reminds us that silence can be a profound statement of integrity and strength. As I reflect on the role of silence in my own life, I'm reminded of a story from the Buddha's time. A group of villagers once approached the Buddha, seeking his wisdom on a dispute. Instead of offering immediate solutions, the Buddha listened in silence, allowing each person to speak their truth. Only when the room was calm did he offer his guidance, framed in a way that reflected the harmony they had created through their own silence. This story underscores the power of listening, not just to others but to the wisdom that emerges in stillness. For those navigating loss, change, or conflict, I offer this. Silence is not a void. It's a space where clarity can emerge. When we step back from the noise, we begin to hear the quiet truths that guide us toward healing and growth. The Buddha's teachings on dukkha, suffering, remind us that pain is a natural part of life, but how we respond to it shapes our experience. Silence gives us the strength to respond with wisdom rather than reactivity. In moments of doubt or overwhelm, ask yourself, what would happen if I chose silence? Not as a retreat, but as a pause. What wisdom might arise if I stopped trying to control or fix and simply allowed things to unfold? Silence, when embraced with mindfulness, becomes a sanctuary, a place where we reconnect with our inner strength, our compassion, and our clarity. As the ripples of our silence spread outward, they touch not only our own lives but also those around us. In choosing silence, we model a way of being that values presence over noise, understanding over judgment, and peace over conflict. And in that choice, we create a world that reflects the harmony we seek. 7. The lotus in the mud, liberation through letting go. Imagine standing by a still pond at dawn, watching a lotus flower bloom. Its delicate petals open toward the sky, untouched by the mud from which it rises. The lotus, revered in Buddhist philosophy, symbolizes purity, resilience, and liberation. It grows in the mud, yet it does not cling to it. This simple truth holds profound wisdom. We, too, can transcend the struggles of life without being defined by them. In life, the mud represents our attachments, fears, and the pain we carry. It's the weight of past regrets, unresolved conflicts, and the need for control. We often hold on, fearing that letting go means losing a part of ourselves. But as the Buddha taught, clinging is the root of suffering. The first noble truth, dukkha, reminds us that suffering is an inherent part of existence, but the second noble truth points to its cause, our attachments and aversions. Letting go is not about denying or erasing our experiences. It's about accepting them as they are and releasing the hold they have on us. Just as the lotus does not reject the mud but uses it to grow, we can use our challenges as a foundation for transformation. This requires trust in ourselves, in the process of change, and in the impermanence of all things. The principle of anicca teaches us that nothing lasts forever. Not our joy, not our pain, not even the identities we cling to. Consider the story of Kisa, a young woman who experienced profound loss. When her only child passed away, she was consumed by grief, unable to accept his death. She carried his lifeless body from house to house, begging for a cure. Finally, someone directed her to the Buddha. With compassion, he told her he could help, but first asked her to bring him a mustard seed from a household untouched by death. Kisa searched far and wide but found no such home. Slowly, she realized that death is a universal truth, and her grief began to transform into wisdom. She let go of her attachment to her son's physical presence and found liberation through understanding. This story highlights a profound truth. Letting go does not diminish love or meaning. It deepens it. Kisa journey illustrates the power of acceptance. By releasing her attachment to what she could not change, she honored her son's memory in a way that allowed her to heal. Letting go is not an act of forgetting or abandoning. It's a way of making space for peace and growth. In modern life, we often find ourselves clinging to relationships, possessions, or identities that no longer serve us. Perhaps it's a friendship that has grown toxic, but we hold on out of loyalty, or a career path that drains our spirit, yet we stay for fear of starting over. These attachments create a false sense of security, but they also tether us to suffering. The Buddha's teachings on karma remind us that every action has a consequence. By holding on, we perpetuate cycles of pain, but by letting go, we create the conditions for freedom. Letting go requires courage, and it often involves facing uncomfortable truths. One of the most challenging aspects is confronting the stories we tell ourselves, the shoulds and what-ifs that keep us trapped. The practice of right view, samadhi, part of the Eightfold Path, encourages us to see things as they are, not as we wish them to be. This clarity is a form of liberation in itself. When we stop resisting reality, we free ourselves from unnecessary suffering. I once knew someone who clung tightly to their past achievements, using them as a measure of their worth. They constantly compared their present self to who they used to be, creating a cycle of dissatisfaction. It wasn't until they embraced the impermanence of their successes and failures that they began to find peace. They realized that their value was not tied to what they had done but to who they were in the present moment. This shift in perspective was their lotus rising from the mud. Letting go also involves setting boundaries, not just with others but with ourselves. It's about recognizing when our thoughts and behaviors keep us stuck. Mindfulness meditation is a powerful tool in this process. By observing our thoughts without judgment, we can identify patterns that no longer serve us and gently release them. The Buddha taught that the mind is like a garden. Whatever seeds we water will grow. If we nurture seeds of resentment, fear, or regret, they will flourish. But if we cultivate compassion, gratitude, and acceptance, they will become the foundation of our liberation. In relationships, letting go does not always mean walking away. Sometimes, it's about releasing expectations and allowing others to be who they are. This can be an act of profound love. When we stop trying to control or fix others, we create space for authentic connection. As the Buddha said, "You can search the whole world and not find anyone more deserving of your love and compassion than yourself." By letting go of judgment of ourselves and others, we align with the principle of metta or loving kindness. The process of letting go often feels like stepping into the unknown. It can be unsettling, even frightening, to release what we've held onto for so long. But the lotus reminds us that growth requires trust. Just as it pushes through the mud toward the light, we, too, must trust in our ability to rise. This trust is rooted in the understanding that letting go is not about losing. It's about making space for what truly matters. For those facing loss or change, I invite you to reflect. What are you holding on to, and how does it serve you? What might you gain by letting it go? These questions are not easy, but they are essential. The act of releasing is not an end but a beginning, a chance to realign with your values, rediscover your strength, and inspire others by your example. The lotus in the mud teaches us that our challenges are not obstacles but opportunities. They are the conditions that allow us to grow, to bloom, and to shine. Letting go is not about rejecting the mud. It's about transcending it. And in doing so, we become a beacon of hope and possibility, showing others that they, too, can rise. As you navigate your own journey of letting go, remember this: you are not defined by what you leave behind. You are defined by the light you move toward. Trust in your ability to bloom, and know that every step you take is a testament to your strength and resilience. Like the lotus, you are capable of rising, no matter how muddy the waters may seem. As we reach the end of this journey, let's reflect on the image of a lotus flower. It grows in muddy waters yet rises above them, untouched and pure. Like the lotus, we too encounter challenges and toxic dynamics, but we are not meant to carry them. Instead, we're called to rise, to let go, and to bloom into our fullest selves. Letting go is not a rejection of others. It's an embrace of your own worth. By stepping away from manipulation and negativity, you're choosing clarity over confusion, peace over turmoil, and self-respect over self-sacrifice. This decision doesn't only transform your life, it sends ripples outward, inspiring others to seek their own liberation. But remember, letting go is not just an action. It's a practice. It requires reflection, boundaries, and a commitment to your values. It's about learning to flow like the water around rocks, finding your path without resistance. And it's about honoring the silence that brings strength, compassion, and clarity. So, let me leave you with this question. What's one thing or one relationship you're ready to release to make space for your peace? Reflect on it, and if you feel inspired, share your thoughts in the comments below. Your story might just be the spark someone else needs. If you found value in this video, please like, share, and subscribe to Lotus Light Teachings. Together, let's spread the wisdom of letting go and the power of inner peace. Until next time, may you walk lightly and freely on your path.